The courthouse sat at the corner of a quiet downtown street, its stone facade weathered by decades of sun, wind, and rain. Flags hung limply in the still morning air, fluttering only when a passing car stirred a breeze. The building looked imposing, as if it had been designed not just to house the law, but to demand respect from all who entered. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood, aged paper, and the lingering aroma of coffee from the small cafe near the entrance. The marble floors gleamed under the soft light filtering through tall, arched windows, and the echoes of footsteps resonated in the otherwise hushed halls. Among the first to arrive that morning was a young mother, her toddler clinging tightly to her hand. The boy was no more than 3 years old, his tiny frame dwarfed by the towering wooden doors and the grandiose interior. His dark hair fell into his eyes as he scanned the courtroom with awe. Every detail seemed monumental. The benches that rose like steps to an unseen sky. The judge's bench elevated above everyone else. The solemn portraits of long-dead justices staring down with stern, painted eyes. For the adults, the courthouse was a place of order, rules, and serious discussions. For the toddler, it was a magical, intimidating labyrinth of sounds, colors, and faces. His mother, a woman in her late 20s with tired eyes, but a gentle smile, tried to calm him as she led him through the hallways. "Stay close, sweetie," she whispered, bending down so he could hear her. "It's important here, but don't be scared." The boy nodded, gripping her hand as if letting go might send him hurtling into the strange and unfamiliar space. He had never been to a courtroom before, and the solemnity of the place pressed down on him, though he barely understood why. Near the back of the courtroom, a large police dog sat obediently beside its handler, a uniformed officer with a calm, steady presence. The dog was a German shepherd, muscles rippling under a sleek coat of black and tan. Its eyes were sharp, alert to every movement, yet there was a gentle patience in its posture that made it seem almost human. The handler, a man in his 40s with a square jaw and serious expression, adjusted the dog's leash and gave a soft command. The dog settled, tail brushing the floor quietly, and sat motionless, a model of disciplined attentiveness. Most people noticed only the professionalism, but to the toddler, the dog seemed alive in a way that startled him, a silent, watchful guardian of the space around it. The courtroom itself smelled faintly of old wood polish, leather-bound law, books, and the faint metallic tang of ink. The benches were carved with intricate designs, their varnished surfaces reflecting the overhead lights. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, creating golden rectangles on the polished floor that shifted slowly as the day progressed. It was quiet, except for the occasional murmur from lawyers reviewing their notes, the soft shuffle of papers, and the faint squeak of shoes on the floor. Every sound seemed amplified in the hushed, reverent space. The toddler's attention wandered from the intricate ceiling moldings to the impressive portraits of past judges lining the walls. Each frame seemed to tell a story, though he had no way of understanding it. His tiny fingers twitched, itching to reach out and touch the polished wood, the carved designs, the painted faces, but his mother held him firmly, guiding him through the sea of adults. He peered up at the judge's bench, eyes wide, wondering why such a tall seat was needed, and why the person sitting there would command such power. To him, it was like a throne, and the judge like a king presiding over a kingdom of law. The murmur of voices in the courtroom shifted as more people arrived. Lawyers in tailored suits moved with careful purpose, adjusting ties and scanning papers. Court clerks typed quietly on keyboards, their fingers clicking rhythmically in the otherwise hushed room. Bailiffs in dark uniforms stood at attention near the doors, faces stoic, scanning every newcomer with trained eyes. Witnesses whispered nervously to one another, glancing at the empty bench as they waited for their names to be called. Every adult seemed focused on something, some purpose invisible to the toddler, who only felt the energy around him, the tension, the anticipation, the strict seriousness of it all. Yet, despite the stern environment, the toddler's curiosity refused to be contained. His gaze kept returning to the police dog, whose presence fascinated him in a way nothing else in the room did. The dog's size, calm demeanor, and watchful eyes captivated him. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the toddler inched closer, holding his mother's hand tightly. The handler noticed the movement and gave a subtle nod, allowing the child a safe proximity while keeping control over the situation. The dog's tail twitched slightly, sensing the child's gentle curiosity, but it remained calm and composed. The mother bent down to whisper reassurance. "Be gentle, okay? Just say hi." Her voice was soft, nurturing, the kind that could melt a child's fear instantly. The boy nodded earnestly, his lips curling into a small smile as he absorbed the advice. He crouched slightly, peering into the dog's intelligent eyes, trying to understand the creature before him. There was something about the dog that seemed both magical and comforting, an authority figure that didn't demand words, only presence. The moment was delicate, fragile, and yet strangely perfect, a pause in the day's rigid routine. As the court clerk called for the proceedings to begin, a hush fell over the courtroom. The judge entered, robes flowing, and the gavel struck with authority, signaling the start of the hearing. Lawyers straightened in their seats, papers shuffled, and the murmur of voices faded into tense silence. Witnesses adjusted their posture, readying themselves to speak. The toddler remained on the edge of the scene, small hands clutching his mother's fingers, absorbing every sound, movement, and detail. In the midst of formalities and serious discussion, the boy's quiet fascination with the police dog was an innocent anomaly, unnoticed by most, but setting the stage for a moment that would later captivate the entire courtroom. Even the police dog seemed aware of the subtle shift. Its ears twitched slightly as it tracked the child's movements, tail wagging ever so gently. The handler's eyes softened as he observed the interaction, recognizing a rare moment of connection. That often goes unnoticed in structured law enforcement settings. The toddler's presence, so small yet so full of curiosity, began to change the energy of the room without anyone realizing it. A place built for rules, order, and serious deliberation suddenly felt lighter, warmer, and oddly more human. The mother whispered a reminder again, guiding her son closer to the dog. "Remember to be nice," she said softly. "Say hello." The toddler nodded with earnest concentration, balancing on his small feet as he moved carefully toward the dog. His wide eyes locked with the animal's, and for a fleeting second, it seemed as if the two understood one another in a silent exchange of trust. The child's innocence met the dog's disciplined presence, creating a connection that was both extraordinary and natural. It was a quiet prelude to a moment that would later shock everyone in the courtroom. The sunlight shifted, highlighting the small figure of the toddler and the large silhouette of the police dog. Observers in the back of the courtroom, some trying to suppress smiles, noticed the unusual scene. Even the judge, reviewing his notes at the bench, paused for a fraction of a second to glance at the gentle interaction. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it hinted at something extraordinary about to happen. A courtroom, usually defined by procedure, tension, and formalities, was on the brink of witnessing an unexpected moment of innocence, empathy, and human connection that would leave everyone talking long after the day ended. As the first witness took the stand, papers shuffled, and lawyers prepared their arguments, the toddler remained near the dog, fascinated and undeterred. He whispered something inaudible, and the dog's ears flicked in response. No one could predict what would come next, but the stage was set. The quiet courthouse, filled with the usual tension and expectation, was now alive with the subtle magic of an unforeseen encounter, a meeting between innocence and authority, curiosity and discipline, a tiny child and a police dog, quietly changing the atmosphere one heartbeat at a time. The courtroom, still echoing with the soft shuffle of papers and whispered instructions, shifted its focus as the clerk called the case to order. It was a minor theft case, one of many that passed through the courthouse every month, but for those involved, it carried weight. The victim, a middle-aged man who ran a local bicycle shop, had reported a stolen bike the week before. Law enforcement had acted quickly, and the stolen property had been recovered, thanks in large part to the keen tracking skills of the police dog sitting quietly at the side of the room. The lawyers rose and presented themselves with the precision of practiced professionals. The prosecutor, a woman in her early 40s with a sharp gaze and no-nonsense demeanor, spoke first. She outlined the events leading up to the theft, the report of the missing bicycle, the investigation, and the deployment of the K-9 unit to track the suspect. Her voice was calm but firm, projecting authority and command over the courtroom's attention. Each detail was backed with evidence, photographs of the recovered bike, and witness statements. Every word reinforced the narrative that the law had been followed and justice sought. The defense attorney, a man with a calm, almost casual demeanor, listened intently while occasionally jotting notes. He did not yet speak, but his presence added tension to the room. Every small movement, the way he adjusted his glasses, the tapping of his pen against the folder, was magnified in the silent, expectant courtroom. To the toddler sitting in his mother's lap, these adults seemed enormous, their voices carrying a weight he could feel even if he didn't fully understand. He clutched his mother's hand a little tighter, finding comfort in her warmth and the proximity of the police dog, whose presence felt both protective and fascinating. The police dog, trained for tracking and obedience, remained stoic. Its ears flicked occasionally, tracking the movements of the adults around it, but its attention never wavered from the subtle cues of its handler. The toddler, eyes wide, could not take his gaze off the animal. There was something magnetic about the dog's quiet confidence, the way it seemed fully aware of its surroundings without any unnecessary movement. For the child, the dog represented an authority that did not shout or scold, an unspoken reassurance amidst the tension of the room. The prosecutor called the first witness, a neighbor who had seen a suspicious figure near the bicycle shop. Day of the theft. The witness described the events clearly, pointing out the moments when the police had acted and how the dog had been deployed to track the suspect. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the nervousness she felt in front of the judge and the courtroom full of observers. The child watched intently, absorbing the rhythm of the courtroom, the way questions were asked, answers delivered, objections raised, and motions noted. He did not understand the words fully, but he felt the gravity of the proceedings, the careful choreography of adults in a space governed by rules. Meanwhile, the defense attorney prepared to cross-examine. His questions were measured, aimed at testing the reliability of the witness's memory and the thoroughness of the investigation. He spoke deliberately, allowing pauses that seemed to stretch time for the toddler. The mother noticed the child's curiosity shifting between the witness and the police dog. She leaned down quietly and whispered, "See how the grown-ups talk about what happened. The dog helped them find the truth." The toddler nodded solemnly, as though processing her explanation. His small mind tried to reconcile the seriousness of the people around him with the calm presence of the dog by his side. As the cross-examination continued, the toddler's gaze drifted from the adults to the police dog again. He noticed the way its muscles tensed slightly at the sound of certain words, how its eyes followed the movements of the witness with precision. The child's fascination grew, and he leaned slightly forward in his mother's lap, whispering, "Doggy, you helped, didn't you?" His voice was barely audible, yet it carried an innocence that contrasted sharply with the seriousness of the proceedings. The handler smiled faintly, acknowledging the child's curiosity without disrupting the courtroom's decorum. The judge, a stern man with a reputation for fairness, monitored the proceedings closely. He noticed the unusual attention the toddler was giving the dog, but chose not to comment. In his years on the bench, he had seen all manner of distractions. Yet there was something unusual about the child's quiet engagement. It was not disruptive. It was attentive, almost reverent. The judge continued to follow the legal arguments, but he could not ignore the subtle warmth spreading through the room, a softening of tension brought about by a small, innocent presence. The next witness was a law enforcement officer who had been part of the investigation. He recounted the moments when the police dog had tracked the suspect through a narrow alley, alerting the officers to the location of the stolen bicycle. His tone was professional, yet there was pride in his voice. The toddler's eyes sparkled with wonder. He had seen police dogs on television, but seeing one in real life actively helping in a case made it feel almost magical. He whispered again to his mother, "Doggy is smart. He finds the bike." She nodded, smiling softly, understanding the child's simple interpretation of complex events. The courtroom seemed to breathe with a rhythm of its own. Every time a witness spoke, the child listened. Every time the dog shifted or twitched its ears, the boy's attention sharpened. He was learning, in his own way, about truth, justice, and the roles people and animals played in uncovering it. The mother observed him quietly, amazed at the child's focus. Others in the courtroom began to notice the small scene unfolding. In the corner, a tiny boy, utterly fascinated by a police dog, adding an unexpected layer of humanity to the otherwise formal proceedings. As the prosecution rested, the defense prepared its case. The defense attorney presented arguments challenging the thoroughness of the investigation and the reliability of the witness statements. He spoke with calm precision, emphasizing the need for careful judgment. Throughout this, the toddler remained fixated on the dog, watching for any sign of reaction. It was as if the boy believed the dog could somehow validate or guide the truth, an innocent but profound recognition of the dog's role in the events being discussed. During a brief recess, the toddler finally approached the police dog under his mother's watchful eye. "Hi, doggy," he whispered, and the dog responded with a gentle wag of its tail. The handler knelt slightly, allowing the interaction while maintaining control. The courtroom, filled with adults who had grown accustomed to its rigid rules, seemed to hold its breath. Something extraordinary was occurring, a pure, unfiltered connection between child and animal that transcended the formalities of law. The mother guided the toddler back to her seat as the recess ended. The boy's small hand still brushed the dog's fur, a subtle reminder of the warmth and trust that had been shared. The judge called the court to order again, and everyone returned to their roles, but the energy in the room had shifted. Adults who had been tense and focused on the procedural details now carried a quiet smile, a soft acknowledgement that sometimes, even in serious spaces, innocence and empathy could create a powerful impact. The rest of the day unfolded with witness testimonies, evidence presentations, and cross-examinations, but the toddler's fascination never wavered. Every sound, movement, and interaction between humans and the dog was absorbed with intense curiosity. The courtroom became a living lesson, not just in law, but in observation, empathy, and the surprising ways small acts of attention can affect those around them. By the time the day's session concluded, everyone, lawyers, witnesses, and even the judge, recognized that the simple presence of a small child and his attention to a police dog had transformed an ordinary day of legal proceedings into something memorable, heartwarming, and profoundly human. The courtroom hummed with quiet tension as the session resumed after the short recess. Lawyers shuffled papers, witnesses adjusted their seating, and the judge reviewed notes with careful precision. The toddler, still seated on his mother's lap, clutched her hand with a mix of curiosity and quiet determination. His gaze, unwavering, was fixed entirely on the police dog at the front of the room. The dog sat alert, ears twitching slightly at the sounds of conversation and shuffling feet, yet it remained calm, as if fully aware that something unusual was about to occur. The mother leaned down, whispering gently, "Remember to be nice. Just say hello if you want." The toddler nodded solemnly, his small lips curling into a shy smile. Though he had no understanding of legal proceedings, he was acutely aware of the dog's presence and the comfort it seemed to radiate. His tiny mind wrestled with fascination and wonder. Here was an animal that was both powerful and disciplined, yet gentle, and the boy felt drawn to it in a way that transcended ordinary curiosity. Minutes passed as the witness on the stand described the events of the theft in meticulous detail. The toddler's attention wandered momentarily, flicking between the person speaking and the dog. He noticed subtle movements, the way the dog's eyes followed the witness, the gentle rise and fall of its chest, the slight twitch of a paw. Every motion held meaning for him, as if the animal were silently speaking a language only he could understand. The courtroom, filled with adults accustomed to formalities and rigid procedures, seemed oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding in the corner. Then, as the witness paused to take a sip of water, the toddler's small voice rang out. "Hi, doggy." The words, simple and unassuming, carried across the hushed room. Heads turned abruptly. The judge blinked in surprise, pausing mid-note, and lawyers froze mid-sentence. Even the stenographer stopped typing for a heartbeat. There was a brief, startled silence as everyone registered what had been said. The mother's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and amusement, while the toddler remained unconcerned, completely focused on the dog. The police dog's ears flicked toward the sound, and it tilted its head slightly, a subtle sign of recognition. The handler gave a small nod, signaling that the child's approach was acceptable, maintaining control, but allowing the interaction to continue. There was a moment of stillness, a shared pause in the midst of the courtroom's formalities. For a heartbeat, time seemed to slow. The seriousness of the legal proceedings faded into the background, replaced by the simple, profound interaction between child and animal. The judge's stern face softened almost imperceptibly. He had seen many interruptions over the years, but rarely had one been so innocent, so unassuming, yet so impactful. Lawyers exchanged curious glances, unsure whether to proceed with the session or acknowledge the unexpected moment. The toddler, sensing that he had attention, leaned slightly forward, eyes wide, and whispered again, "Are you scared?" His voice was soft, tentative, but carried an honesty that transcended age. The courtroom gasped quietly, the collective attention shifting entirely to the child and the dog. The witness on the stand blinked, momentarily distracted, while a few jurors leaned forward, captivated by the unexpected scene. The toddler's question was both naive and profound. It was not a question about law, evidence, or procedure. It was a question about understanding, about empathy, about connection. And the dog, trained to respond to commands but not to words of innocence, wagged its tail slightly as if acknowledging the child's inquiry. Even the mother could hardly suppress a smile, astonished by her son's courage. She had always known he was unusually observant and empathetic, but seeing him address a police dog in a formal courtroom was something entirely different. The courtroom, a space typically dominated by rigid authority and procedural rules, had transformed into a stage for something extraordinary, a pure, unfiltered moment of connection. Observers whispered among themselves, caught between amusement and awe, recognizing that they were witnessing something rare. The defense attorney, ever composed, allowed a small smile to appear at the corner of his lips. He recognized the subtle shift in the room's energy. The prosecutor, for her part, paused in mid-sentence, adjusting her glasses as she tried to regain the courtroom's attention. The judge, holding the gavel loosely in his hand, finally spoke. "Let the child be," he said quietly, his voice carrying authority, but also understanding. "He is not disturbing the proceedings." The words were simple but powerful, granting permission for a moment that would become unforgettable. The toddler, encouraged, took a tentative step closer. "Do you like your job?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. The courtroom reacted audibly. There were soft chuckles, whispered comments, and a few gasps. The dog remained seated, attentive, its eyes locked on the child. The handler, maintaining professionalism, allowed the interaction to continue, recognizing the therapeutic and humanizing effect this small child was having on everyone present. The moment was no longer just between toddler and dog. It had rippled through the courtroom, affecting all who witnessed it. Witnesses on the stand smiled, some visibly moved. One whispered to the person next to them, "That kid is braver than most adults I know." Even the jurors, who had been quietly observing the formalities, found themselves leaning forward, captivated by the innocence and courage displayed in such a serious setting. The courtroom, usually dominated by stress, rules, and tension, had transformed into a place where empathy and innocence held sway. And the toddler, unaware of the effect he had created, continued to speak gently. "You're a good dog. You help people." The dog responded with a subtle wag of its tail and a small, low whine, a sound that seemed almost like acknowledgement. The handler whispered softly, "Good boy," and the dog's posture relaxed slightly. The toddler's smile widened, a tiny victory in an adult world governed by rules and expectations. The scene, simple yet extraordinary, drew attention from every corner of the courtroom. Cameras, quietly recording, captured the moment, knowing that something rare and beautiful had unfolded. The mother's heart swelled with pride. She watched her son, fully engaged, fearless, and compassionate, interacting with an animal trained to enforce law and protect the community. She understood, as did others in the room, that this moment was bigger than the case itself. It was a reminder that empathy, innocence, and courage could appear in the most unexpected places. And in that courtroom, where adults spoke in measured tones and followed precise rules, a toddler had reminded everyone of the simple power of connection. As proceedings resumed, the judge maintained order, but the mood had subtly shifted. Lawyers, witnesses, and even the court staff carried a newfound warmth. The toddler's words, seemingly insignificant at first, had illuminated a different side of the legal process, a reminder that amidst evidence, testimony, and procedure, human moments still mattered. The police dog, calm and attentive, continued its role, but now with the silent acknowledgement of the child's empathy and courage. The courtroom, forever changed by the interaction, seemed lighter, more connected, and undeniably human. Throughout the rest of the session, the toddler remained engaged, occasionally whispering to the dog, asking simple questions, and observing reactions. Each small exchange reinforced the bond between child and animal, and each moment echoed through the courtroom, leaving subtle traces in the hearts of all present. Lawyers found themselves pausing longer than necessary. Witnesses smiled more readily, and even the judge seemed less stern, a gentle acknowledgement of the profound impact of innocence in an adult world. By the time the session drew to a close, the courtroom had been transformed. The theft case, though important, was momentarily overshadowed by the extraordinary connection between a small child and the police dog. Cameras, quietly recording, captured the magic, ensuring that the story would not be forgotten. And the toddler, still unaware of the magnitude of what he had done, remained simply curious, compassionate, and fearless, a tiny force of nature, in a world that often underestimates the power of innocence. The courtroom seemed to pulse with a quiet energy that morning, a subtle hum of anticipation beneath the formal proceedings. The toddler, perched on his mother's lap, had become the unexpected center of attention. His small frame radiated curiosity, and his wide, dark eyes were fixed entirely on the police dog, sitting calmly at the front of the room. The dog, a German shepherd trained for precision and obedience, regarded the child with a calm intelligence, as if recognizing that something extraordinary was unfolding in this otherwise ordinary legal environment. The mother gently adjusted, her son in her lap, whispering softly, "Go ahead, sweetie. Ask him." The child's tiny hand reached out ever so slightly toward the dog, whose large frame did not intimidate him. Instead, he seemed drawn to its presence, sensing the combination of strength and gentleness in the animal. There was a pause, a brief moment where the world seemed to hold its breath, the formalities of the courtroom fading into the background as something far more human and profound took center stage. The toddler, summoning his courage, leaned closer to the dog and whispered, "Are you scared?" His voice, small and unassuming, carried a weight far beyond his ears. The courtroom fell into stunned silence, all eyes momentarily shifting from the formalities of law to the quiet drama unfolding at the side of the room. Witnesses paused mid-sentence, lawyers tilted their heads in disbelief, and even the judge, pen hovering over a sheet of notes, looked up with an expression somewhere between curiosity and amusement. The dog's response was subtle but unmistakable. Its tail wagged slowly, a gentle acknowledgement of the child's words, and its ears twitched as if in recognition. There was a calm intelligence in its gaze, a quiet understanding that resonated deeply with the toddler. Observers described the moment as surreal, a tiny human and a trained police animal communicating in a language that transcended words, a connection that required neither explanation nor justification. The tension that had gripped the courtroom moments before seemed to dissolve into something lighter, warmer, almost magical. The mother watched, barely breathing, as her son and the dog continued to regard each other. She felt a swell of pride and wonder. Her child, so young and seemingly fragile, had managed to do something that adults rarely accomplish. He had bridged the gap between human and animal, between authority and innocence. The courtroom, a space defined by rules, procedures, and often cold logic, had been transformed into a stage for empathy and understanding. In that moment, the child's small voice became the most powerful presence in the room. A soft murmur ran through the courtroom. Jurors shifted in their seats, some smiling quietly, others leaning forward, captivated by the unusual exchange. Witnesses glanced at one another in disbelief, whispering softly about the courage and empathy displayed by a child who could barely form full sentences. Even lawyers, trained to focus solely on facts and evidence, found themselves caught in the emotional gravity of the scene. It was as if the innocence of a toddler had unlocked a door within the courtroom, allowing a glimpse of humanity that was rarely visible amidst legal battles. The toddler continued, leaning closer and speaking with gentle confidence. "You're a good dog. You help people, right?" The dog tilted its head slightly, eyes attentive, and wagged its tail in slow affirmation. The handler, maintaining professional composure, allowed the interaction to continue, recognizing the therapeutic and humanizing effect the child had on everyone present. The courtroom, a place often dominated by tension and strict adherence to protocol, had shifted. There was laughter now, soft and heartfelt, and even the judge allowed a subtle smile to escape his usually stern expression. The prosecutor, initially flustered by the unexpected interruption, regained composure, but could not hide a softening of demeanor. She glanced at the child and the dog, noting how the small interaction had eased the atmosphere. The defense attorney, ever composed, allowed a faint smile to show as well, acknowledging the rare effect of pure innocence on the adult psyche. The courtroom staff, usually silent observers, exchanged glances, quietly appreciative of the moment's unexpected beauty. Everyone recognized that something extraordinary had occurred, something beyond law or procedure, something purely human. As the child's words hung in the air, a sense of calm and unity spread through the room. Witnesses, jurors, lawyers, and even the judge seemed to breathe a little easier. The weight of the legal proceedings, the pressure of testimony and evidence, was momentarily lifted by the simple, profound connection between a toddler and a dog. It was a reminder, unspoken yet universally understood, that empathy, curiosity, and courage could transcend the boundaries of age, authority, and expectation. The toddler, sensing the dog's calm and attentive demeanor, reached out further. "Do you like your job?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The dog's ears twitched, eyes remaining locked on the child. The handler gave a quiet nod, allowing the interaction to continue. There was no need for elaborate gestures or commands. The child's innocence and curiosity spoke volumes, and the dog's trained responsiveness mirrored a gentle acknowledgement, creating a dialogue of understanding that needed no words. Observers described the scene as magical. Adults, who had been tense and focused on procedural details, felt a wave of warmth and connection. Even the judge, who had presided over countless cases, seemed momentarily captivated by the simplicity and authenticity of the moment. It was a reminder of the power of empathy and the unique ability of children to express truths that adults often overlook. The courtroom, a place defined by rules, had become a living classroom in understanding, compassion, and human connection. The mother whispered softly, encouraging yet protective, "Be gentle, sweetie. He's listening." The toddler nodded, eyes wide and focused, speaking in soft tones that carried honesty and courage. "You're brave, doggy. Thank you for helping people." The dog, responding with a gentle wag of the tail and a low, approving whine, seemed to communicate trust and understanding. Witnesses and jurors smiled, some quietly wiping a tear, realizing that they were witnessing a rare and extraordinary moment in an environment usually reserved for tension and strict procedure. Even the attorneys allowed themselves to soften, recognizing that the small, genuine interaction had humanized the courtroom. The judge, maintaining authority, but not ignoring the warmth in the room, continued to preside while observing the extraordinary scene. The child's questions and gentle words had become a bridge, not just between child and dog, but between everyone in the courtroom. Adults who had arrived focused on legal minutiae now found themselves moved, reminded of the humanity behind the proceedings. As the session continued, the toddler remained engaged, whispering small observations to the dog, who responded with subtle gestures of acknowledgement. Each movement, each glance, each gentle word added to the growing sense of connection and warmth. The courtroom, usually dominated by tension and seriousness, had been transformed into a space where empathy, innocence, and courage could flourish. It was a quiet miracle, unfolding in real time, invisible to most, but unforgettable to those who witnessed it. By mid-morning, word of the interaction had spread quietly among courtroom observers. Witnesses spoke in hushed tones, jurors exchanged glances, and even the bailiffs seemed to walk a little lighter, smiling under their professional composure. Cameras discreetly captured the moments, preserving the memory of a tiny child connecting with a trained police dog in a space that rarely allowed for moments of genuine warmth. The story of courage, curiosity, and empathy was unfolding before their eyes. The judge, finally addressing the room, allowed a brief pause. "Let's continue, but allow the child his moment. It seems he has something important to teach us." "All," he said, his voice calm, resonant, and filled with subtle authority. There was no admonishment, no disruption of the legal proceedings, only acknowledgement that a unique, magical connection was happening, one that would be remembered long after the session concluded. The toddler, encouraged by the quiet support of his mother and the subtle acknowledgement of the judge, continued to interact gently with the police dog. "You help people find things." "That's good," he said softly, eyes bright with innocence and understanding. The dog responded, tail wagging, ears flicking, exuding calm and attentiveness. Adults who had spent years in courtrooms recognized the rarity of the moment, a tiny voice, full of courage and empathy, speaking truths more powerful than any legal argument. By the time the morning session concluded, the courtroom had shifted irrevocably. Legal proceedings resumed, evidence was presented, and arguments were made, yet the memory of the toddler and the police dog remained etched in everyone's minds. The child's words, gentle and sincere, had created a ripple of warmth, humanity, and connection that permeated the room. What began as a minor curiosity had become a defining moment of empathy, courage, and magical connection in a space usually dominated by rules and procedure. Even as people left the courtroom for lunch, whispers and smiles followed them. The interaction between a toddler and a police dog had reminded everyone of the profound simplicity of innocence, the unspoken power of empathy, and the unexpected ways small moments can leave lasting impressions. In a courtroom built for authority, discipline, and procedure, a 3-year-old had created a moment that transcended law, reminding everyone present that even in the most structured spaces, humanity could shine brightly. The courtroom, usually a place defined by tense silence, shuffled papers, and carefully measured words, had transformed into something extraordinary. A small toddler, perched on his mother's lap, had managed to do what no one in the room had expected: capture the attention of everyone present with a simple display of curiosity, courage, and empathy. All eyes seemed to return again and again to the quiet figure at the side, a tiny human facing a large, intelligent police dog, whose calm presence only amplified the magic of the moment. Even the most hardened professionals, lawyers, accustomed to arguing with precision in witnesses, trained in formal testimony, found themselves drawn into the gentle drama unfolding before them. The toddler's words, soft and innocent, had punctured the serious air of the courtroom and left everyone momentarily disarmed. "Hi, doggy," the boy had whispered earlier, and now, as he leaned closer with his wide, dark eyes, his next question carried an unspoken weight. "Are you scared?" The dog's tail twitched slowly, as if in acknowledgement, and the room held its breath. It was laughter that followed first. Soft, quiet, almost hesitant at first, as though no one was sure it was appropriate in a courtroom. Then, gradually, the chuckles grew. Witnesses smiled, their nerves momentarily forgotten. Jurors leaned forward, faces lighting with amusement and awe. Even lawyers, often the most serious figures in any legal setting, allowed themselves a quiet smile, some suppressing soft laughter behind folded hands. The judge, who had maintained a stern composure throughout the proceedings, permitted a subtle grin to appear at the corners of his mouth. The courtroom, filled with adults who took law seriously, had been humanized by a child and a dog. The mother, trying to maintain some sense of order, whispered quietly to her son, "Be gentle, sweetie. Remember to be kind." But she too could not hide the warmth in her eyes. The child, emboldened by the gentle encouragement and the positive energy radiating from the room, leaned even closer to the dog, speaking in a soft voice that carried sincerity and wonder. "You're good at your job, right?" The dog's ears twitched in response, its tail wagging slowly. The handler remained professional, but a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, acknowledging the rare and beautiful connection. Witnesses on the stand, who moments before had been recounting events with nervous precision, now looked on with a mixture of astonishment and delight. One whispered to her colleague, "I can't believe a toddler just... wow." The jurors, too, seemed transformed. The energy in the room shifted subtly, a blend of amusement, warmth, and human connection that no evidence, testimony, or legal argument could have created. For a few precious moments, the courtroom became something else entirely, a place where innocence and courage could touch even the most serious hearts. The toddler, seemingly aware of the attention he had drawn, continued to speak softly to the dog. "Thank you for helping people. That's very brave," he said, his small hands reaching out as if to offer comfort. The dog, trained for alertness and discipline, responded with gentle wagging and a quiet, approving whine. The handler, crouching slightly to stay at the dog's level, allowed the interaction to continue, recognizing the therapeutic effect the exchange had on the adults around them. The courtroom's formal boundaries had not been broken. They had been softened by the unassuming magic of innocence. Laughter and awe mingled in the air. A soft chuckle from a juror here, a stifled laugh from a lawyer there, and even a quiet grin from the stenographer, who had remained otherwise stoic, all contributed to the room's newfound warmth. The judge's gaze softened as he adjusted his robes, allowing a subtle but genuine smile to show. What had started as a simple, innocent interaction between a toddler and a dog had evolved into a shared experience, a communal acknowledgement of something pure and unexpected within the rigid walls of law and procedure. Even the courtroom staff, who usually observed silently from the back, could not help but feel moved. Bailiffs glanced at each other with knowing smiles. Court clerks leaned forward slightly, and a few spectators in the gallery shook their heads in disbelief and delight. Cameras, discreetly positioned, captured the scene, ensuring that the interaction between child and dog would live on beyond this single session. It was a moment that defied expectation, a reminder of the extraordinary power of empathy, curiosity, and courage, even in a world dominated by structure and formality. The prosecutor, regaining composure, allowed a small, amused smile to break through her professional facade. Her voice, though firm, carried a hint of warmth as she continued the case. The defense attorney, for once, seemed to ease back in his seat, permitting the humor and awe to soften the room's tension. The courtroom, which had moments earlier been dominated by the weight of law, testimony, and procedure, now resonated with laughter, smiles, and a quiet sense of wonder. The child had reminded everyone that even in serious circumstances, joy and connection could emerge. As the toddler continued to interact gently with the dog, observers began to comment quietly among themselves. "Look at him. He's fearless," whispered one witness. "So brave and kind," said another. Jurors exchanged smiles, leaning toward one another in quiet acknowledgement of the rarity of the moment. Even the judge, who had presided over countless trials, seemed touched by the small, fearless presence of the child and the calm attentiveness of the police dog. The courtroom had become more than a place for legal proceedings. It was now a stage for human connection, courage, and joy. The mother, though trying to maintain some order, allowed her son to continue. She understood, as everyone else seemed to, that this was a rare opportunity for genuine interaction and learning. "Be gentle, sweetheart," she whispered, though. Her tone carried pride and admiration rather than admonishment. The toddler nodded, eyes wide, speaking in quiet, sincere tones. "Good dog. You help people and make them happy." The dog's tail wagged, ears flicking, as if acknowledging both the praise and the appreciation in the child's voice. Even the courtroom's atmosphere, often heavy with anticipation, tension, and seriousness, had been transformed. A few murmurs of surprise and delight spread through the gallery, with observers leaning closer to witness the unusual scene. Adults who had been focused on evidence and procedural rules now allowed themselves to be fully present, captivated by the innocence, courage, and empathy displayed by a 3-year-old boy and a trained police dog. Cameras quietly documented the moment, preserving it for those who would later marvel at the unexpected warmth in a typically formal setting. The judge, recognizing the extraordinary impact of the interaction, allowed a brief pause in proceedings. "Let's continue," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "But let us appreciate the reminder that sometimes even the smallest voices carry the most important messages." The courtroom responded with a quiet acknowledgement, and the child, encouraged, whispered another small question to the dog. "Are you happy helping people?" The dog responded with a slow, approving wag of the tail, earning a soft, delighted laugh from the toddler. The laughter, soft but pervasive, spread throughout the room. Witnesses smiled. Jurors leaned forward. Lawyers allowed themselves brief moments of amusement, and even the judge's eyes twinkled slightly. The courtroom, usually dominated by strict adherence to procedure and solemnity, had been humanized by the pure, unfiltered interaction between child and dog. It was a reminder that in the midst of seriousness and responsibility, moments of joy, awe, and laughter could arise unexpectedly and leave lasting impressions. As the morning session continued, the toddler remained engaged. He whispered small observations to the dog, offered gentle praise, and leaned slightly forward in fascination. The dog, attentive and calm, responded with subtle gestures that conveyed recognition and understanding. Adults in the courtroom, watching the exchange, felt an emotional shift, an unspoken lesson in empathy, courage, and the enduring power of innocence. The laughter that had begun as soft chuckles now carried a sense of shared joy, an acknowledgement that this small, fearless child had profoundly affected everyone present. By mid-morning, the courtroom was fully aware that a simple, gentle interaction had created an extraordinary ripple effect. Lawyers, witnesses, jurors, and staff carried the warmth with them as proceedings resumed. Cameras captured every moment discreetly, documenting the magic of a 3-year-old speaking to a police dog in a formal courtroom. It was a rare example of innocence and courage, breaking through the rigid structures of adult life, leaving an indelible mark on everyone present. Even after the laughter subsided, a quiet sense of awe remained. The courtroom had been transformed, not by dramatic arguments or legal maneuvering, but by the small, sincere presence of a child and a dog. Witnesses whispered to one another about the bravery and empathy they had witnessed. Jurors smiled quietly, reminded of the simple truths often overlooked in adult life. Lawyers allowed themselves a subtle sense of humility, recognizing that while they argued cases, a child had reminded them of the enduring power of kindness. By the end of the session, the courtroom had been irrevocably changed. The toddler, oblivious to the magnitude of his actions, had captured the hearts of everyone present. The police dog, calm and attentive, had facilitated a moment of connection and warmth that transcended legal proceedings. And the adults, normally bound by rules, protocols, and the seriousness of the law, had been reminded that moments of laughter, awe, and human connection are as vital as any testimony or evidence in the room. The courtroom had settled into a rhythm once more, but the atmosphere was unmistakably different. The laughter and awe from the toddler's interaction with the police dog lingered like a gentle echo, softening the room's usual rigidity. Lawyers, shuffled papers with slightly less urgency. Witnesses spoke with a softer cadence. And even the judge, presiding with his usual authority, seemed to carry an unspoken warmth behind his eyes. Something subtle yet undeniable had changed. The presence of a small, fearless child had shifted the energy of the courtroom in a way no procedural rule could anticipate. As proceedings resumed, the prosecution began presenting additional evidence. But there was an undercurrent of calm that had not been present earlier. The witnesses, many of whom had been tense and nervous, appeared slightly more relaxed. Their voices, once careful and clipped, now carried a natural cadence, free from the strain of anxiety. It was as though the toddler's presence, his small words of kindness and curiosity directed at the dog, had reminded them of the human side of the situation. The courtroom, normally dominated by logic and evidence, had become a space where emotion and empathy could coexist with the law. Toddler remained seated on his mother's lap, his dark eyes observing every subtle movement and gesture. Occasionally, he whispered small observations to the police dog, which responded with gentle gestures, ears flicking, tail wagging, and subtle shifts in posture. It was a silent dialogue, one that required no words, yet conveyed understanding, attention, and trust. Adults in the courtroom began to notice, glancing discreetly at the child and the dog. Some smiled quietly, a few chuckled under their breath, and others simply watched in awe, recognizing the rare, humanizing influence this small interaction had on everyone present. The defense attorney, who had been meticulously planning cross-examinations, found himself distracted by the subtle shift in mood. The tension that usually hung heavily in the air had been replaced with a sense of calm. He noticed that witnesses were less rigid, more open in their expressions, and even some jurors seemed lighter in their posture. It was a strange, intangible effect, yet impossible to ignore. The child's innocence and courage had a ripple effect, subtly influencing the dynamics of the courtroom without a single directive or instruction. During a break in testimony, the toddler leaned closer to the dog and whispered, "You're helping everyone, aren't you?" The dog tilted its head in response, and the handler, observing the gentle interaction, allowed it to continue. The mother's eyes filled with pride as she watched her son engage with such confidence and empathy. Witnesses and jurors, observing quietly, seemed to reflect on the simplicity and profundity of the moment. Here was a child, 3 years old, whose innocence and curiosity were reshaping the energy of an entire room filled with adults, authority, and procedure. The judge, noticing the ripple effect, paused briefly in his review of notes. Even he, who had seen thousands of cases, understood that this interaction was extraordinary. He could sense the subtle relaxation among the witnesses, the softened tension in the attorney's movements, and the quiet smiles that occasionally flickered across jurors' faces. In a space designed to enforce order, logic, and discipline, the presence of a small child and his empathy toward a dog had created something unexpected, a reminder of humanity's innate capacity for connection, even in the most formal and serious of environments. One witness, a young woman who had been visibly nervous when she first took the stand, found herself speaking more fluidly and confidently. Her voice, which had trembled at the beginning of the session, now carried clarity and calm. She glanced discreetly at the toddler, who smiled back gently at her before returning his attention to the dog. It was as if the child's innocence had given her permission to relax, to speak honestly, and to allow her humanity to show amidst the weight of the legal process. The courtroom, already transformed by subtle laughter and awe, had now experienced a more profound impact, emotional liberation. The prosecutor, continuing with the presentation of evidence, felt the unusual warmth of the room, but remained focused. Yet she could not ignore how the small interactions at the edge of the courtroom were shaping the environment. Witnesses were more at ease, jurors were less tense, and even the officers who had been part of the case moved with a gentler, more patient demeanor. The prosecutor allowed herself a brief, quiet smile, recognizing the subtle power of empathy and human connection in a place often dominated by rules, logic, and authority. The toddler's influence became more apparent when a particularly nervous witness hesitated mid-sentence. Normally, such a pause might have drawn subtle glances of impatience or frustration. Instead, the room held still, as if collectively acknowledging the need for patience. The child whispered softly to the dog, "It's okay. You can take your time." The dog responded with a gentle shift, tail wagging, and eyes softening. Observers noted the profound effect of the toddler's simple words. They seemed to grant permission for the witness to proceed without fear, fostering a calm and compassionate environment. Even the jurors, who had been silent observers until now, began to respond to the quiet energy shift. They exchanged subtle glances, some leaning slightly forward, others smiling in small acknowledgement of the unfolding human connection. Their attention, though officially directed toward the legal proceedings, was undeniably influenced by the child and the dog. Adults trained to observe, analyze, and judge were subtly reminded of the simple, universal truths of empathy, patience, and understanding. The courtroom, in a sense, was no longer just a place of law. It had become a space for observing humanity at its purest. During a brief recess, the toddler's curiosity and courage reached a new height. He leaned closer to the police dog and whispered, "You're very brave. Everyone is happy because of you." The dog, responding with a small, approving wag, seemed to acknowledge the words. The mother's eyes glistened with pride as she whispered softly to him, "You're making a difference." The child nodded, unaware of the full extent of the impact his words and presence were having. Witnesses and jurors who observed the exchange began to reflect on the subtle power of kindness and empathy, realizing that this small human had shifted the dynamics of an entire courtroom. The judge, now fully aware of the unusual but positive energy in the room, adjusted his proceedings accordingly. He allowed brief pauses, permitted moments of quiet observation, and maintained an unspoken acknowledgement of the child's impact. Attorneys, witnesses, and jurors subtly mirrored this approach. The courtroom's tone had transformed. Tension and rigidity gave way to calmness, attentiveness, and even a soft sense of joy. The legal process continued, but the atmosphere had been forever altered by the toddler's fearless curiosity and gentle words. Even the court staff, who usually remained silent and observant, could not help but notice the shift. Bailiffs, clerks, and reporters whispered softly to one another about the extraordinary effect of a child's presence on the adult-dominated environment. Cameras discreetly recorded the moment, knowing that the interaction would resonate far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The toddler, still whispering gentle encouragement to the dog, had created something that could not be measured by rules, evidence, or testimony. A profound, unexpected impact on the human experience within a formal setting. By the afternoon session, the courtroom had settled into a harmonious rhythm, guided subtly by the child's presence. Witnesses spoke with confidence and clarity, jurors leaned forward attentively, and attorneys found themselves listening with a renewed sense of empathy and patience. Even the judge, presiding with authority and fairness, allowed for moments of human connection that would have been unthinkable earlier in the day. It was clear the toddler had not just observed the courtroom, he had transformed it. As testimony continued, the child occasionally whispered encouragement to the police dog, his words gentle and sincere. "Good job, doggy. You're helping people." Each whisper seemed to ripple outward, affecting the energy of the room. Adults, though focused on the case, could not ignore the quiet influence of empathy and innocence at work. Witnesses spoke more freely, jurors nodded subtly, and even attorneys allowed themselves brief smiles or nods of approval. The courtroom, once a... By the end of the day, the cumulative effect of the toddler's presence was unmistakable. Adults who had arrived focused solely on evidence and testimony, left with a renewed sense of humanity. Witnesses were calmer and more expressive, jurors more engaged and reflective, and even attorneys and court staff had been reminded of the power of empathy, courage, and connection. What had begun as a simple curiosity between a toddler and a dog had expanded to touch everyone present, leaving an enduring impression that would be remembered long after the trial concluded. The courtroom, once defined by tension, seriousness, and procedure, had been transformed into a space where laughter, awe, empathy, and connection coexisted with law. And at the center of this transformation sat a small child and a police dog, silent architects of an extraordinary, unplanned impact on the adult world around them. The story of the day would ripple beyond the courthouse, becoming a tale of courage, innocence, and unexpected influence, a testament to the quiet power of a toddler's heart. By late afternoon, the courtroom had returned to its usual procedural rhythm, yet the energy remained undeniably altered. Even as witnesses concluded their testimony and attorneys exchanged the final arguments of the day, the echoes of the toddler's innocent interaction with the police dog lingered in the air like a gentle, unforgettable hum. Observers, staff, and jurors carried subtle smiles, recalling the soft words and curious gestures that had softened the day's formal tension. For most, the moment was a rare reminder that empathy, courage, and innocence could shine even amidst the most serious settings. Outside the courtroom, word began to spread quickly. A few spectators had quietly captured the interaction on their phones, careful to remain respectful, yet eager to share something extraordinary. Within hours, the images and snippets of the toddler whispering to the police dog circulated through social media and local news outlets. The story, simple yet profoundly touching, resonated immediately. Headlines highlighted the unexpected courage and empathy of a 3-year-old in a formal legal environment, and local news anchors replayed clips with awe, describing how a tiny human had managed to captivate the hearts of an entire courtroom. The mother, still holding her child close, was overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Initially hesitant about the exposure, she soon realized that the story carried a message far beyond her own experience, a reminder of the enduring power of innocence and empathy in a world often dominated by rules, authority, and adult concerns. The toddler, oblivious to the media attention, remained focused on the police dog, occasionally whispering gentle praise and admiration. His curiosity had not waned, and in that moment, it was clear that the child's small heart had left an outsized impression on everyone who had witnessed the interaction. News crews arrived at the courthouse the following morning, eager to cover the story of the toddler who had captured the public's imagination. Reporters interviewed the judge, the lawyers, and a few witnesses, each offering reflections on the unique impact of the child's presence. The judge, maintaining his usual composure, spoke thoughtfully about how the courtroom had been subtly transformed. It was a simple, human moment, he explained. A reminder that even in formal proceedings, empathy and kindness can influence those around us profoundly. His words resonated, echoing the sentiments of attorneys and jurors who had witnessed the event firsthand. The defense attorney, asked to comment, smiled and admitted, "I never expected to be moved by a toddler during a trial." But his presence reminded all of us that compassion and courage exist in the most unexpected places. The prosecutor echoed the sentiment, noting that the child's gentle words had calmed witnesses and lightened the atmosphere, allowing for a smoother flow of proceedings. Everyone involved acknowledged the extraordinary impact of the toddler, a presence both unassuming and remarkably influential in a space defined by rules, logic, and authority. Social media, amplified the story quickly. Videos of the interaction went viral, drawing comments from thousands of viewers who marveled at the child's bravery and empathy. People from around the country expressed admiration for the toddler, sharing their own experiences of small acts of kindness and courage. The story transcended age, profession, and geography, becoming a universal symbol of innocence and the quiet power of human connection. Parents, educators, and animal lovers alike resonated deeply with the images of the child whispering to the police dog, capturing a moment that seemed timeless and profoundly human. Local authorities also reflected on the incident, noting how it showcased the importance of community, trust, and the bond between humans and trained service animals. The police handler, who had facilitated the interaction safely and professionally, shared insights into the dog's responsiveness and intelligence. He noted that while the dog had been trained for discipline, the subtle acknowledgement of the child's gentle words and gestures demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for empathy and understanding. The handler's account reinforced the extraordinary nature of the day's events, highlighting the rare bond formed between child and dog. Meanwhile, the toddler himself remained unaware of the growing attention. His days continued as usual, filled with play, curiosity, and exploration. Yet those who had witnessed the courtroom scene understood that he had created a moment of lasting significance. Observers reflected on the simplicity of the interaction. A child's natural curiosity meeting the calm, disciplined presence of a service animal. No grand gestures or dramatic interventions were needed. The power lay in observation, connection, and pure intent, a reminder that the smallest actions often leave the largest impressions. The courtroom staff, often tasked with maintaining order and decorum, found themselves reflecting on the broader implications. They discussed how a single innocent act had humanized the legal process, softened tensions, and reminded all involved that empathy and patience can coexist with authority and procedure. Even clerks and bailiffs, typically silent and behind the scenes, expressed admiration for the toddler's courage. They marveled at how such a small human had left a lasting impression, not through argument or assertion, but simply through curiosity, attentiveness, and kindness. Educators and child development specialists also weighed in, emphasizing the unique bravery and emotional intelligence demonstrated by the toddler. They noted that the child's ability to engage with the dog, express empathy, and affect the behavior of adults around him reflected early signs of profound social awareness. His interactions offered a lesson in observation and understanding, illustrating the importance of nurturing emotional intelligence from a young age. The story quickly became a reference point for discussions on childhood development, highlighting the power of empathy in shaping human experiences. The viral spread of the story prompted invitations to local talk shows and human interest programs. Interviews with the mother, carefully guided to protect the child's privacy, emphasized the lessons of kindness, courage, and observation that had emerged from a seemingly ordinary courtroom setting. The narrative focused not only on the toddler's bravery, but also on the broader impact, how simple human connection can influence behavior, ease tension, and inspire awe in even the most structured environments. The message resonated widely, capturing the hearts of viewers nationwide. Schools, libraries, and community centers soon incorporated the story into lessons about empathy, courage, and the power of observation. Teachers described how children could relate to the toddler's natural curiosity, drawing parallels between his actions and the importance of compassion in daily life. The police department even arranged a demonstration showcasing the bond between service animals and the community, using the story as an example of trust, respect, and gentle guidance. Across the city, discussions about kindness, courage, and observation spread, sparked by the simple yet profound interaction between a toddler and a police dog. Meanwhile, the courtroom itself became a site of reflection. Staff and frequent visitors spoke about the unusual atmosphere during that day's proceedings, noting the subtle warmth that lingered long after the session concluded. Lawyers, judges, and clerks reflected on how a child's simple words and gestures had humanized the space, softened tension, and reminded everyone that law and empathy need not be mutually exclusive. Even months later, they spoke of the day with a mixture of pride, amusement, and reverence, acknowledging the lasting impact of a small, fearless presence in a structured, adult-dominated environment. The mother, observing the ripple effect, expressed gratitude but also humility. She emphasized that the toddler had acted naturally, without pretense or intention to influence others. The magic of the moment lay in its authenticity. A child's curiosity, a dog's attentive presence, and the unspoken understanding that developed between them. She highlighted the broader lesson for adults, children, and communities. Empathy, kindness, and courage can emerge in the most unexpected settings, and even the smallest voices have the power to inspire, teach, and transform. As the story continued to circulate, its message reached far beyond the immediate courthouse. Social media posts, news articles, and interviews spread across state lines, inspiring countless people to reflect on the simple, profound impact of empathy. Viewers, both young and old, shared their own experiences of human-animal bonds, acts of kindness, and moments of courage. The narrative became a cultural touchstone, illustrating how innocence and authenticity can influence even the most formal and serious environments, leaving an enduring mark on those who bear witness. By the end of the week, the toddler's story had become a symbol of hope, courage, and empathy. Authorities, educators, journalists, and families discussed it repeatedly, marveling at the simple yet profound chain reaction initiated by a child. Whispering to a police dog. The narrative transcended the original courtroom context, serving as a reminder that extraordinary human connection often arises from the smallest, most innocent actions. Observers reflected on the rare power of a tiny voice in a space designed for order, discipline, and formality, and the lasting lessons it could teach to all who experienced it. The courtroom, once just a space for the law, became immortalized in memory as the stage for an extraordinary human moment. Adults who had been present spoke of the child's influence with reverence, recalling how the simple acts of curiosity, courage, and empathy reshaped their understanding of human interaction. The police dog, still calm and composed, remained a symbol of trust, intelligence, and connection. Together, the toddler and the dog had created a narrative that would inspire, teach, and touch countless hearts for years to come. The days following the courtroom incident were a mixture of quiet reflection, media attention, and subtle shifts in the local community's consciousness. The story of the toddler and the police dog had spread like wildfire, first locally, then regionally, and eventually nationally. Social media posts, news segments, and human interest articles circulated widely, all marveling at the simple yet profound impact of a 3-year-old's bravery and empathy. Yet amid the attention, the mother and child remained grounded, navigating the new attention with humility and care. The courtroom itself retained traces of the unusual energy from that day. Staff often reminisced quietly about the way the toddler's presence had softened the environment, reminded witnesses to speak more openly, and even inspired jurors to pay closer attention to the human elements of the case. The judge, reflecting privately, admitted that he had never seen anything quite like it. "In all my years on the bench," he said during a rare interview, "I've seen evidence, testimony, and arguments that were technically perfect, but nothing has ever reminded me so sharply of the power of simple human connection." His words highlighted the rarity of the event, a moment that transcended procedure and touched the core of humanity. Meanwhile, the mother fielded calls from reporters, talk shows, and community organizers. She was careful to protect her son's innocence while sharing the story's deeper lessons: courage, empathy, and the unexpected influence even a small child can have. She spoke passionately about nurturing children's natural curiosity and compassion, emphasizing that the world often underestimates the impact of small, deliberate acts of kindness. The toddler himself, blissfully unaware of the viral attention, continued his daily routines: playtime, naps, and meals, punctuated by his natural fascination with the world around him, including visits to the police dog, who had become a trusted friend. Local educators recognized the opportunity to turn the story into a meaningful lesson for children and adults alike. Schools incorporated discussions about empathy, courage, and observation into classroom activities. Teachers encouraged students to think about moments when they could make others feel safe, supported, or valued. Librarians highlighted the story in reading sessions, emphasizing the idea that innocence and curiosity could inspire even adults in positions of authority. The toddler's simple words and gentle demeanor became a teaching tool, demonstrating that small actions can ripple outward and create profound change. The police department also reflected on the event, sharing the story internally as an example of the importance of trust, patience, and humane interaction. The handler of the police dog recounted how, in years of working with service animals, he had never witnessed such a clear, mutually respectful connection between a child and a trained canine in a formal environment. It was extraordinary. He said, the dog responded to the child in a way that mirrored understanding and empathy. That moment reminded all of us why our work is about more than just procedure. It's about people. The story became part of departmental training, illustrating the subtle yet profound influence of trust and kindness. As media coverage grew, so did the human interest angle. Talk shows featured psychologists and child development experts discussing the toddler's courage, empathy, and keen observation. They explained how children's unfiltered curiosity can sometimes reveal truths and influence human behavior in ways adults overlook. Viewers were captivated not by the courtroom drama, but by the innocence and bravery of a small child who had dared to speak gently to a powerful police dog. The narrative reminded the public that courage doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it appears in quiet, thoughtful moments. Communities far beyond the courthouse began to embrace the story. Parents shared it with their children as an example of how kindness and empathy could bridge gaps between individuals, even in intimidating situations. Animal advocacy groups highlighted the importance of respectful interaction between humans and animals, noting the extraordinary sensitivity displayed by the toddler. Local civic organizations hosted storytelling events, encouraging attendees to reflect on the ripple effects of small, sincere actions. The story had become more than a viral moment. It had evolved into a living lesson on compassion, courage, and observation. Back in the courtroom, the impact continued in subtle ways. Attorneys, having observed the transformative effect of the toddler's presence, carried the lesson forward in their professional lives. They approached witnesses with greater patience, adjusted their communication strategies, and recognized the human side of legal proceedings. Jurors, too, remembered the gentle influence, applying a nuanced empathy in deliberations. The child had unwittingly reminded everyone that law and humanity are not mutually exclusive, that empathy can coexist with authority, structure, and justice. A mother reflected privately on the enduring influence of her child. She realized that while her son had no understanding of the legal consequences, he had demonstrated lessons far more profound than any textbook or training session could convey. "It's amazing," she whispered one evening, "how someone so small can teach people so much. I hope he always keeps that bravery and kindness, because the world needs it." She understood that the viral attention and public praise were secondary to the true impact, a quiet transformation in the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed the interaction firsthand. Psychologists analyzing the event noted that the toddler had exhibited remarkable emotional intelligence. His awareness of the dog's presence, his gentle inquiries, and his ability to influence adults' responses were all signs of an unusually advanced understanding for his age. Experts explained that the child's courage stemmed not from knowledge of the law or authority, but from innate curiosity and empathy. The lesson was clear. Empathy, observation, and bravery are not bound by age or experience. They emerge whenever humans engage authentically, thoughtfully, and with kindness. As months passed, the story remained a reference point for discussion, teaching, and inspiration. News outlets revisited the tale, highlighting how the toddler's simple interaction had created a ripple effect far beyond the original courtroom. Parents, educators, and professionals shared it repeatedly, emphasizing that moments of courage and kindness are universally impactful. The toddler himself continued to grow, oblivious to the full scale of his influence, but surrounded by the quiet acknowledgement that even the smallest voices can inspire change. The police dog, meanwhile, became a symbol of trust, discipline, and gentle understanding. Community events often reference the bond formed between the child and the animal, demonstrating how empathy and respect are crucial in interactions with service animals. The handler reflected on the enduring impact, noting that even years later, officers would reference the story as a reminder of patience, observation, and human connection. Together, the child and the dog had created a narrative that transcended individual roles, illustrating the power of mutual respect and understanding across generations and species. Eventually, the story was included in educational programs designed to teach children about courage, empathy, and human-animal relationships. Videos of the toddler speaking softly to the dog were analyzed for their educational value, highlighting nonverbal cues, tone, and emotional awareness. Children were encouraged to consider how their actions, words, and attentiveness could influence the world around them. The courtroom moment had transformed into a teaching tool, demonstrating that even brief, seemingly small actions can leave lasting impressions on people's hearts and minds. Community leaders and civic organizations embraced the story as well, hosting workshops and talks that emphasized compassion, empathy, and courage. The message was clear. Greatness is not always defined by power or expertise, but often by the courage to act kindly, to observe carefully, and to engage sincerely. The toddler's impact was measured not in headlines or viral views, but in the subtle, enduring shifts in behavior, attitude, and understanding among those who had experienced or learned about his actions. In quiet moments, the mother would watch her son play, reflecting on how a simple courtroom interaction had grown into something far greater than she could have imagined. The lessons of empathy, courage, and human connection continued to resonate in her family, her community, and beyond. The child, oblivious to fame or recognition, simply continued to explore, question, and connect with the world around him, reminding everyone that authenticity and kindness are far more powerful than we often realize. Finally, as the courtroom returned to normal operations, those who had witnessed the toddler's courage carried the memory with them. Attorneys, jurors, and staff often reflected on the subtle, transformative effect of a small, fearless presence in a space usually dominated by authority. The story endured not only as a viral sensation, but as a deeply human reminder. Courage, empathy, and connection are timeless, universal forces capable of changing the world, one small interaction at a time. And so, the toddler's quiet bravery, his gentle curiosity, and his fearless engagement with the police dog became a lesson remembered by all, that even the smallest voices can ripple through hearts, influence behavior, and inspire a world that sometimes forgets the extraordinary power of innocence, kindness, and empathy. The courtroom, the city, and countless hearts carried the memory forward, forever changed by a tiny human who dared to speak soft.